Welcome into another edition of the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined as always by Carter Karels, and we got another special guest on the show today, Steve Robertson, here to preview Mississippi State as the Aggies and Bulldogs will clash this weekend. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Man, I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the Aggies coming back to Starkville. I mean, if nothing else, when we get that great aerial photo of everybody wearing maroon for marketing purposes, kind of moving forward. I thought it was funny yesterday too. There was one of these A&M accounts. Yeah, I have fun with people on Twitter. I try not to be vindictive or anything, but he was trying to encourage Texas A&M fans to bring cowbells, and I was like, well, that's kind of rich, So I had to quote tweet him, and I said, yeah, Aggie fans should all show up wearing maroon and ringing cowbells. That'll really show us. So.
No doubt. Mike Elko was asked this week about the Cowboys and preparing for the sound, and said no, he won't use cowbells in practice. That's a promise he made to his players. They'll use noise instead, and certainly won't bring the cowbells in until they get there on Saturday. Looking at this Mississippi State team, obviously they're coming home off of a tough swing, probably one of the tougher swings you'll find, going to Texas and Georgia. I know it hasn't been the season that they wanted, but in both those games showed some encouraging signs the last couple of weeks. What has kind of contributed to that improvement over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think it's getting Michael Van Buren comfortable. An unexpected situation. Blake Shapen, gone for the year, and there's no textbook out there to kind of prepare you. Okay, we're going to take your veteran quarterback, and he's done, and now you got to go play a true freshman. And so Jeff Lebby's done a good job, I think, making Mike feel a little more comfortable, and I think you saw that especially last week. And first quarter, I thought he was a little tight. He missed on a couple of quick slants, and there's some controlled passing opportunities they provided for him to kind of get him in a rhythm. But the big pass to Mario Craver over the top really kind of got him going. And I think the rest of that ball game, offensively, State gave Georgia all they wanted and then some. And I think that Georgia secondary maybe is not as good as advertised, but this Mississippi State wide receiver group, and listen, you look at the 1-5 record. I know Coach Elko mentioned that on Monday. This Mississippi State wide receiver group can run with anybody in the country. It's just a matter of, can you get protection? And that's going to be, I think, really ideally where this game is kind of won or lost for the State offense is, can they protect Van Buren? Because if they can, I think there are some plays to be made down the field. Now, how things stack up defensively is a completely different story.
Steve, Elko raved about Van Buren's arm strength, said he could throw it a mile. Just curious how you'd assess him from that standpoint, and just how different does the offense look with him at quarterback as compared to Shapen?
Well, Shapen can run a little bit. Van Buren can run a lot. Now, they don't have a lot of design quarterback runs, but I think one of the things that makes him dangerous is when you do move the pocket a little bit and give him the run-pass option. I don't mean necessarily call the RPO play, but when you give him that high-low concept, and if it's not there, he can tuck it and go. And I think he can make people pay for that. But they're kind of careful. I mean, you lose a scholarship quarterback, you can't play scared, but you also can't play reckless. And so I think it's been kind of a controlled thing. They brought Chris Parson in at times to do some quarterback run stuff. Now, he didn't play last week. I think there's a chance you see him this week, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see Chris throw the football. Chris actually has a stronger arm than Van Buren, which is ridiculous to think about. But Parsons is a guy that can really, really sling it. And but they utilized him some against Texas, provided a different wrinkle. But the thing about Mike that I think makes him different than most freshmen is, number one, he played at St. Francis Academy, right? So they played a national schedule. They didn't just play, the Mississippi School of Math and Science or somebody like that. I mean, I wrote a column last night, mentioned that they played De La Salle. His very first high school start was on the road in California against De La Salle. Well, he won that game 42-28 and threw 4 touchdowns. I mean, he's a gamer, but he is a guy that the guys really respect. And it's taken a couple weeks to kind of get everybody on the same page because, I thought Kirby Smart said it best in his Monday press conference last week. Van Buren's very first real game was against Florida. He's thrown into the game, not expected to play. And then he takes him down a touchdown drive and would have had a second if time hadn't expired. I mean, the clock runs out at second and goal at the 1 yard line, and then you go to Texas, play the number 1 team in the country. Then you get the open date, and then you got to go play number 5 Georgia, a place that Mississippi State hadn't won at in forever and a day, and so, nothing against the Aggies, but we're kind of glad to see you guys at home rather than having to go in two of the most hostile environments against two of the best teams in the country.
No doubt. That's, as I mentioned, that's the toughest stretches you're going to find going to Texas and Georgia. You mentioned the defense, and obviously the numbers kind of tell, the story about where they're ranked and all that. What have been some of the biggest struggles when you really kind of dive into it?
Well, I think at the beginning, stopping the run, and that's, we know who Moss is. I mean, we're not new to the conference. We're not like Texas and Oklahoma just showed up and kind of getting familiar with everybody. We know who Le'Veon Moss is. And so, stopping him is going to be job one, and that's going to be tougher to do than easier said than done, because this is where I think State has struggled. We knew going into the year the defensive front was going to be a little bit of a liability. They worked really hard in the portal, trying to find an edge guy, trying to find a little bit of depth. They go out and get Suleiman Paka from Purdue, who was a depth guy at Purdue. You get Kedrick Bingley-Jones, who was highly recruited at a high school, but he was a depth guy at North Carolina. So they never really found a difference maker. And with what they had returning, we knew that this was going to be a real issue, being able to stop people up front. Trevion Williams, a guy that was highly recruited at a high school, I think A&M even recruited him, was considered the best defensive player in Mississippi for his class. He's been banged up much of his career, but is having a pretty good year this year. But there's just not a lot of pieces around him that have kind of cohesively kind of come together to form a good run defense. And so they're having to run blitz a lot more. And so when quarterbacks can be multiple, it's kind of put those linebackers in a stressful situation. The linebacker group, by and large, is pretty good. They're pretty athletic. Stone Blanton, of course, kind of runs the show there. He has been much better the last 2 weeks. I think a lot of it's just getting him reps. And he's a Mississippi guy, grew up a Mississippi State fan, and then incredibly went to South Carolina, which surprised a lot of people that he was a Mississippi State baseball commitment for 2 years, and he ends up flipping to South Carolina. Well, now he's back where he should have been all along, and I think that State's benefited from him becoming more comfortable. Now, the secondary has been better, I think, than advertised. And I say you look at those numbers and you say, well, the completion percentage against is terrible, right? But so much of that has been the controlled passing game. And State has seen a ton of bubble screens, some inside slip screens and things like that. But there's not a lot of people getting over the top of State. And Georgia had a little gadget play last week. They hit down the field, but you're not seeing a lot of that. Isaac Smith is a guy that's been kind of an in-the-box safety. I think he still leads the nation in tackles. I know he leads the Southeastern Conference. And some would say, well, safety leading the team is not necessarily a great thing. Well, they play him in the box. It's not like he's playing typical free safety spot. So, the pieces are there, but this group doesn't have a lot of depth. And the defensive line is kind of performing as expected, which is, really not up to standard.
Steve, Mississippi State going in this game, what are maybe the matchups you're looking at as far as A&M may have a pretty big advantage here and, Mississippi State may have an advantage here?
Well, obviously the Aggie running game. And I'm interested to see, how the play calling changes a little bit, with Wegman back full time. I know they're not going to have a lot of design runs for Connor, but I know that he is athletic enough that when things break down, he can move the chains and kind of get out of bounds. But Marcel Reed killed us last year, and I have talked about this story extensively, and I'll share this with you and your listeners. And we found out Tuesday last year, prior to the A&M game, that Max Johnson was not going to play. There's a lot of people that talk, so we knew this, right? And so the discussion was had is like, hey, Max Johnson's not going to play. Well, who are they going to play? They're going to play the Reed kid, the kid that transferred from Fresno State, 13th quarterback, much different guy. Well, what do? They prepare for Max Johnson. And then Reed absolutely destroys him. And people forget State got up 7-0 in the ball game. Xavier Thomas returns opening kickoff for a touchdown. So you get the best possible start. And then from there, it was all Aggies. And I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I joke with people all the time when people say, are you a glass full? I'm just happy to have a glass. You know what I mean? But I always kind of tend to see things will kind of work themselves out if you work hard. And I went on my own message board at halftime of that game last year in College Station, and I wrote, this cannot continue, because it was so incredibly embarrassing for Mississippi State, and the fact that they knew that Marcel Reed was going to be the quarterback and they didn't prepare. And Jed Johnson, linebacker, beloved Mississippi State player, said in postgame, we prepared for the other quarterback. And I'm sure that's not something they wanted to get out. But I think ultimately that kind of fed the decision that, hey, we got to go make a change right now. But it was an embarrassing debacle of a game. And I was on a show earlier. I've never seen a game in the middle of the year where both head coaches get fired within 48 hours of the game ending. I mean, that's something we may never see again in our lifetime, right? But it had to happen. But the reality of it is this Mississippi State team, they're rebuilding, and probably got about you got an 85 scholarship limit. There's probably about 40, 45 kids that I would say right now that I would consider bona fide SEC two deepers. And some of that, too, is schematic changes, right? I mean, you have some guys that may fit one scheme, don't fit the new scheme. It's not necessarily an indictment on their talent, but, based on what they're asked to do, I think they're having some difficulties with that.
Now, joined by Steve Robertson here to preview Texas A&M and Mississippi State. If you listen to this on the podcast, we're going to take a quick break. If you're hanging with us on video, stay with us. We're going to be right back after a quick break. Steve, diving back into this game and looking at, we mentioned this game's obviously in Starkville, and Mississippi State has had a lot of success at home versus A&M over the last couple of years. Do you expect there to be a pretty lively crowd with Mississippi State coming back? And then what sort of home field advantage could that give them?
Well, it's loud even when it's not at capacity, because of the cowbell. It's completely different. And then the way the stadium is constructed, the sound just kind of resonates within the venue. And so the students have done a great job all year. That's one thing I like to commend those kids. Of course, I have a son that is a student. He didn't always get to come to games, but I'm much more connected with the students as my children have aged. And I've had two girls that graduated from Mississippi State. And so those students, not just for us, but for everybody, that's a lifeblood of your program, right? I mean, that's your future donors and your future season ticket holders. And so they have turned out and done a good job. The early games when it was hot, they'd leave at halftime, but there's been a good group that's kind of maintained all their support throughout the season. And, there's some pin-up demand too, because Mississippi State hadn't played a home game in a month. I mean, you only get 6 or 7 of these a year, right? And so, you had the trip to Texas, the open date, and then the trip to Georgia. And so it's been a long time since people have been together. So I do think there'll be a good crowd. Will it be a great crowd? It kind of remains to be seen. But I know there's been a big push to get everybody out there. And I think Van Buren's ascension has kind of stirred up some feelings of optimism that maybe down the stretch they can win some ball games and make some things interesting. And you mentioned the history. State's 9-8 all time against A&M, and the only 2 wins in Starkville were Johnny Manziel's Heisman season and then the COVID year when Kellen Mond kind of finally put it all together. And State was first year under Mike Leach. And so to be honest with you, Mississippi State people are always kind of excited when A&M comes because crazy things tend to happen. It's just like I think about that, I guess it was the 22 game when Emmanuel Forbes blocked the field goal and the Cameron Richardson runs it back for a touchdown. And that was an exciting game. And then State began to pull away. And, something always weird happens. And we probably need Forbes to come back, because in 2020 he had the pick 6. We probably need him to come back and be the honorary captain or something. But they're also honoring the 2014 team. And so last I heard that like 58 of the players had already RSVP'd, and there's some other ones that are going to come that didn't RSVP, including the name that you guys know that lives up around Dallas, Texas. And so it's going to be interesting having those guys back. What kind of juice does that give the stadium? Those guys are going to be kind of around the players all weekend too. And so, at the end of the day, Mississippi State people are expected to show up. It is going to be a pretty special weekend, but I think a lot of it is just the love of college football and the fact there hadn't been a home game in a while. You'll have a lot of Bulldog fans show up, and the afternoon game makes it easy for people too, right? Because it's a day trip. Show up, go to the game, you can get home in a decent hour.
Yep.
By the way, 2 times this week, Elko has referred to Dak Prescott as Dak Prescott. I don't know why. I don't know how you could get that name wrong, but it's been cracking me up.
Especially with him playing at Dallas. I mean, it's not like he's in Seattle,
Yeah, exactly. But Steve, I want to ask you just about Jeff Lebby. I know it's halfway through first season, but just assessing the job he's done so far and the direction you feel like this program is going, not just this season, but just beyond the season.
I believe in Jeff Lebby. I really do. And I've had a chance to speak to him multiple times. And, his vision for the program, I think, is one that people will certainly buy into. But, they had to flip the roster last year. They had 45 new players this year. And going to have to kind of flip some things again, in the portal season. They're going to be very aggressive in the portal. But I think he just got to get his players. I mean, I think the scheme, I think you're seeing it right now. You got a lot of guys that are first-year players playing together, but you're starting to see what he wants to do offensively. I know he wants to run the football better. And one of the things that's really hurt the running game is, that they really hope to get 2 backs in the portal. They only end up getting Davin Booth from Utah State, and he's been good. He hadn't been great, but he's been good. But then you lose Jeffrey Pittman, a guy that was, your top returner from a year ago. Lose him before the season even starts due to an off-the-field indiscretion. And then Woody Marks, of course, transfers to USC. I would like to have seen what this offense looked like with Marks at running back, because of the fact that he didn't get fully utilized at Mississippi State in the air raid because he was basically an extension of the passing game. But I think in this offense, being able to run the football would have been great for him. But they're selling recruiting on a promise. Right. And you need to get some production. You need to find a way to get some wins down the stretch here and kind of show people you're heading in the right direction. You've got a nucleus of players coming back. But I think Jeff's going to do a great job. I mean, Jeff's won everywhere he's been. This is the first year, I think, since he has been an offensive play caller that he didn't improve the offensive performance from one year to the next. And, of course, you throw in the loss of your starting quarterback. That certainly is a factor in all that. But, no, I think Jeff's going to do a great job at State. And I think it's been more frustrating for him this year than he anticipated. But when you lose your starting quarterback, you're basically having to build from scratch. And I know against Texas, they probably limited the playbook a little bit too to kind of find some things that Van Buren was comfortable with. Now you've had a few weeks now with him as QB1 getting teams reps with the first team. And so we'll see how things go. But as far as long term, I don't have any objection at all to Jeff Levy. And I think that sometimes you got to take your lumps, and that's what we're doing right now. But I think Mississippi State will be better for it next year.
Steve, you mentioned Chris Parson as potentially a guy that could see some snaps. And I'm just wondering if there are any other X factors or guys that could impact that game maybe we're not talking about.
We really like Seydou Traylor, the tight end, and because he's not the typical tight end. He's more of a flex tight end. He's kind of a jumbo X. He's a guy that he hurdles people all the time. I mean, it's like he's a freak of an athlete, and he's considered a pro prospect, and he transferred here from Colorado, and one of the last guys that was forced to sit out a year, which worked out good for Mississippi State, I think. But, he is a guy, and you saw some play design stuff last week, where they use him kind of as an H-back type, and then they show early in the ball game that he's a lead blocker, and then later in the game they throw it to him, on that big 4th down play and that big drive against Georgia. The concept they ran, and of course they just kind of turn him loose and he's able to get outside, and it's really not a fair mismatch when he's paired up with a corner with the ball in his hands. I mean, he's just, because he can run the football and he does bring some physicality. I think that he's a guy with this A&M front. He's going to be a big part of this game. If State's going to be able to make this thing competitive and have a chance to take it to the 4th quarter, the tight ends are going to have to be a big part of it, not just in the blocking aspect, but in that short passing and intermediate passing game.
So, Steve, if you had to list out maybe your keys, but just for Mississippi State to make this a closer game, then maybe the line's at 16.5 right now, but to make it a one-score game or have a chance of winning the game at the end, what do they need to do to be in that position?
Well, win the turnover battle. That's then they did against Georgia, and the problem was in the middle of the game, you couldn't get stops, right? You give up the touchdown right before the half, and then they come out the first drive of the second half, and they kind of put us away. But you got to be able to manage that aspect of it too. You can't get in a situation where you're getting separation and having to chase the game. I think State has to survive the first quarter. When they kicked a field goal against Georgia last week, it was the first lead they've had against the Power 4 team the entire year. And so if you can find a way to get through that first quarter and maybe have the lead and keep the crowd engaged, and then maybe get a big play somewhere in special teams, or, whether it's block a punt or a pick six, something like that. I mean, that's an important aspect of this thing. And so I think they're going to need some help from A&M, but they're going to have to force the action. If they just sit back and, run defense all day, I think Texas A&M wins this game, 31-7 or something like that. I mean, I don't think you can be competitive playing bend but don't break against this Texas A&M offense. And I do expect them to be a little more pass happy with Wegman back. And you guys would know better than me. But when you look at, the run to pass ratio with Reed in the game, because obviously you're playing to their strengths, right? I mean, you're not going to go up there and ask Marcel Reed to run the air raid. You're not going to have Connor Wegman go run the option stuff or run his own read stuff. It just doesn't work that way. But So I think there's two things to prepare for, and I'm not sure how much we see Reed. I know we don't want to see him after last year. Matter of fact, I'm going to make a call and see if we can't have him arrested as soon as he crosses the county line. We'll go ahead and keep him, and then we'll lose the evidence and turn him loose. That guy killed us last year, but a hell of a player. But I think State's got to get a little help. I think you've got to force some errors, and I think getting some pressure on Wegman, especially on third down, is going to be big. I think if you sit back and drop 8, he's too good a quarterback. He'll find the holes in your defense and move the chain. So when they get a chance to get off the field on third down, they've got to be able to get off the field.
Steve, great insight as always, and encourage everybody to head over to Gene's page and check out all your guys' work as you guys get ready for this weekend to preview everything. Thanks so much for the time and joining us.
Yeah, we'll have I know a lot of times fans want to read up. Like we'll do a story index on Friday of all the stories that we've written all week about the matchup between State and A&M. And so you can find that, so if you haven't been over this week, you can come over on Friday morning. I'll have that index up, and you can see everything the Mississippi State players had to say about the Aggies. And we do videos of all the press conferences and every media opportunity. And I would suggest there's probably nobody covering a school more in depth than we are. And we do 10 to 12 stories every single day. And so we love what we do. We're very passionate about what we do. And we're happy to have you guys as partners on our network. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. And not that I'm here to give the corporate line, but, I've been in this industry since 1997. Yeah. And I've never been happier with a working arrangement than we have with 247 Sports. And so is everything perfect? No, it's not going to be perfect anywhere. But I think our network of sites, especially in the Southeastern Conference, is really unsurpassed. And so we're happy to provide you guys with some coverage as well. And if there's anything that we can do, please let us know.
No doubt. Likewise. And thanks again I highly encourage everybody to go check it out. You guys do a great job. So I highly encourage everyone to go get all your Mississippi State info over on the site and check them out. They do great work. So until next week, thanks again for everybody for joining us, and we'll be back soon, and enjoy the weekend. A&M, Mississippi State on Saturday afternoon at 3:15 Central Time. Have a good weekend, everybody.